Where is Mr. Anandan?
He's here, sir. I can see him.
You can see him?
Yes, sir. I can see him.
Okay. Oh yeah, there he is, yes.
Has Mr. S.K. Marwaha joined us for the session? Mr. Marwaha, if you can hear us. Since it is 4 sharp, I would now like to begin with the Manthan. A very good evening and a warm welcome to everyone present for today's Manthan, the topic for which is Electronics System Design and Manufacturing, ESDM sector. Udyog Manthan, an initiative by DPIIT, is a marathon of webinars focusing on promoting quality and productivity in the Indian industry. The deliberation will follow a set structure, starting with setting of the context, and then each of our panelists will be given approximately 8 minutes to put forward their points, followed by a discussion and Q&A. Participants are requested to keep their cameras and mics off to avoid any disruptions. The chat box will be open for asking questions, which will be answered in the Q&A section. Also, speakers are requested to switch on their camera while they speak. The ESTM sector is the fastest growing sector in the world, and the past 5 years have especially seen a significant gain in the ESTM sector as the global production has undergone a shift from the USA and Europe to Asia. India is one of the biggest and fastest growing digital economies in the world, set to cross 900 million internet subscribers by 2025. As of 2017, the Indian ESTM sector was valued at approximately $2 trillion and contributed approximately $70 billion to the country's GDP. By 2025, the electronics market in India is expected to grow up to $400 billion. With the potential to grow, there are several challenges as well, which shall be discussed in this deliberation. With this note, I would now like to invite Mr. S.K. Marwaha to set the context for today's deliberation. Mr. S.K. Marwaha is presently the Senior Director at the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. In his working experience of over 29 years in the Government of India, he has handled various policy matters pertaining to the electronics and information technology industry, fiscal and foreign trade, and more. And he has been closely involved in facilitating the growth of the industry in the country. He is presently handling the new schemes, PLI and SPECS, for promoting the growth of domestic electronics hardware manufacturing. Over to you, sir. Sir, you are on mute.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Thank you, and good afternoon to all the participants in this today's Udyog Manthan webinar on electronic system design and manufacturing industry, and also to the distinguished speakers we have today on the panel. And to set the context, basically, as has already been said, this Udyog Manthan is a series of focused webinars on promoting quality and productivity in the Indian industry. The objective is to identify issues and find solutions for promoting productivity, quality, and their interlinkages in the context of the Indian industry. So the agenda is actually focused discussion on productivity and quality in the Indian industry across sectors. So today we are meeting to discuss this aspect, the challenges and opportunities in quality and productivity in the electronic system design and manufacturing space. So as you know, we have come a long way in the past 5 years as far as domestic electronics manufacturing is concerned, and it has truly proved to be an important leg of the Make in India program of Government of India. The policies and schemes that have been launched by the government, including the ease of doing business and various fiscal incentives, have created a conducive environment for domestic electronics manufacturing to flourish. Electronics manufacturing is a priority sector for the government. It is one of the pillars of the Digital India program, and it aligns with the Make in India, Skill India, and Startup India programs. As you are aware, the National Policy on Electronics 2019 has been notified with the vision to position India as a global hub for electronic system design and manufacturing and create an enabling environment for the industry to compete globally. So, as we look forward to becoming a global hub for electronics manufacturing, it is extremely important that to be competitive, globally competitive, we focus on quality and productivity. So by 2025, we are estimating that the demand for electronics will grow up to $400 billion annually. And the domestic production of electronic items has also increased substantially from about $29 billion in the fiscal 2014-15 to about $76 billion in 1920 at a compound annual growth rate of 23%. However, the sector currently accounts for 2.7% of India's GDP. The electronic sector holds a key position of importance in the Government of India's goal of generating $1 trillion economic value from the digital economy by 2025. In 2020 April, we launched in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic 3 key schemes, which are the Production-Linked Incentive Scheme, the Scheme for Promotion of Manufacturing of Electronic Components and Semiconductors, and the Modified Electronics Manufacturing Cluster Scheme. So these schemes combined have a total outlay of about 50,000 crores. The objective is to promote domestic manufacturing in the entire value chain of electronics, including the core components and materials, which will increase the domestic value addition and reduce dependence on import of electronic goods by focusing on skill, technology, scale, as well as the global market. So MeitY has already notified safety standards under the aegis of Electronics and Information Technology Goods, Requirement for Compulsory Registration Order 2012. The 2 main pillars, again coming back to quality and productivity, these are the 2 main pillars of any manufacturing-driven economy. And many countries have used this in the past, particularly Japan, and even today are using to attract global investors and manufacturers, for example, countries like Vietnam. And India needs to build the same pillars for manufacturing excellence. The key for India is to create awareness amongst the manufacturers across the chain, that is raw materials, intermediate goods, and finished product manufacturers. The first step in this direction will be to understand the challenges and opportunities concerning productivity and quality across industry sectors and build a mass-scale movement of awareness on the scale of Swachh Bharat for quality and productivity. The aim is to draw in best practices and experiences of the sector and industry experts to identify challenges related to quality and productivity faced by the Indian industry. This will ultimately result in creating a compendium of quality-related sectoral recommendations that will aid industrial competitiveness, leading to greater demand for Indian products and services, thereby leading to export promotion and import substitution. So that is the context of today's webinar. And I would just like to briefly touch upon few the key achievements that we have made in electronics manufacturing before we open the seminar for further consultation and deliberations. So you will be happy to note that besides domestic electronics production, which has grown at a CAGR of 23% in the past 5 years, the export of electronic goods has also kick-started. The export was $8.8 billion in 2018-19, which has grown to $11.7 billion in 1920 at a year-on-year growth of 34%. So that is extremely good news. Mobile phones, network equipment, chargers, printed circuit board assemblies are the major items of export. And mobile phones has actually emerged as the key sector in the Make in India program of the government. And today it accounts for mobile handset production and the parts and components production accounts for over 40% of the total electronics production of India. We have emerged as the second largest manufacturer of mobile handsets in the world in volume terms. And over 200 units are manufacturing mobile handsets and their parts and components. Mobile chargers is another significant export items. More than 45 crore mobile chargers valued at over 4,000 crores have been manufactured and exported during financial year 1920. The PCB assemblies are going to be another item of export, major item of export from the country in the coming times. About 30 crore units of PCB assemblies valued at 85,000 crores have been manufactured in the last fiscal. The televisions have also shown impressive growth. We have grown from 52 lakh units manufactured in 2014-15 to 125 lakh units manufactured in 1920 at a compound annual growth rate of 19%. The LED lighting products has been a major success, and in the past 5 years, we have grown at a compound annual growth rate of 50%. The employment generation is also happening in this sector. So presently, the sector employs about 30 lakh persons across the country directly, out of which the mobile manufacturing segment contributes about 7 lakhs to the employment, which is both direct and indirect. So that is as far as our key achievements are concerned. And with that, I would like to throw open the webinar for consultations, and I will request our esteemed speakers to deliberate on this, and the government expects that the end result will be specific recommendations towards achieving this goal of quality and productivity in the ESDM sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your opening remarks and insights. Now I request Mr. Shishir Bhardwaj to take over from here as sessions moderator. Mr. Shishir Bhardwaj is a management consultant who guides manufacturing companies to develop their own capabilities for developing applications and tools for manufacturing with their current resources. He has worked in discrete manufacturing industries for 20 years. He is the trainer of the master trainers of the Zero Defect, Zero Effect scheme and developer of the potent e-learning course, The Manufacturing Competitiveness for eQuest. He is also associated with companies from automotive industry to electronics to aerospace and steel to develop production scheduling and material requirements planning systems that could help overcome gaps in ERP. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Seerath. Thank you, Mr. Marwaha. Very potent data as well as focus on the industry. Since we have an esteemed panel here, I would quickly like to start inviting our guests. And to begin with, I will give the mic to Mr. Manish Sharma, who is President and CEO, Panasonic India and South Asia. He's been involved with many government initiatives as well as other productive issues. And Mr. Manish, over to you.
Thank you, Shishir. And it's so difficult to speak after Mr. Marwa because his reflections were so objective and essentially touched a couple of very important aspects of our conversation today. So he spoke about enablers. So I'm not very sure that to what extent I'll be able to reciprocate on them. And he also spoke about how standards have evolved over a period of time and finally some of the achievements. And the message which I'm taking out of his speech, opening remarks, is that it is also responsibility of people like us and also other colleagues into industry to spread the awareness. I think that is very important, and I'm sure forums like these are going to really help catalyze the conversation. So once again, good evening to everyone. And I'm extremely thankful to the Udyog Manthan team for having me here. So I'll sort of take a few minutes to share my thoughts on some of the aspects of performance indicators of manufacturing in a situation when India is now wanting to position itself prominently in the global supply chain map. And these would be essentially around some of the aspects of how we can deliver a better quality, which is kind of acceptable not only in our country but elsewhere also. And how can we look at enhanced level of productivity to be competitive on a global scale. And possibly a lot of this would be in the backdrop of my own experience into manufacturing operations. While the strategic direction of the country is very clear that we need to sort of position ourselves as a prominent manufacturing hub, not only to cater to demand potential of but for an integral role in the global supply chain as well. So we should be looking at a situation of not only unlocking the demand potential of our country, but starting to export and then also look at parallelly backward integrating into component manufacturing, which I think is due and which is the most important need of the hour. In this situation, I think we need to clearly find our own niche. And over last few years, government, we have closely worked with our line ministry, DPIIT, and chambers and industry have come together to work closely to identify the challenges, the opportunities, And in this whole process, also the enablers which are needed to unlock this potential. Some of the recent announcements which Mr. Marwa also mentioned are also going to play a catalyzing role. Not only initiatives to enable domestic manufacturing, I think it was MSIPs in the past and spec schemes and PLI now. These are game changing. But parallelly also, we are also looking at making Indian production and the consumption also at par with global standards. A lot of catch up has happened in last few years. I really compliment the efforts of our line ministry, BPIT, BIS and BE and all the other agencies for laying this very strong foundation. So possibly in last few years, sometimes industry used to feel that, these changes are happening too frequently, and we used to also make such representations. But I believe in this whole process, we have done a lot of catch up, and today very proudly we are at par with the global standards, into compliances, into variety of standards. And today not only the global standards are aligned with us, but also the global product launches also consider India as a priority for the potential we possess. And I believe this is appropriate time for us to deliberate on such matters. And how do we ensure we create world-class quality and best of productivity? So there'll be few of the areas where we need to pay attention, and I'm sure my fellow panelists are going to bring up interesting insights and some clear recommendations. I'll share some of my thoughts into this, taking a couple of more minutes. So first is the design consideration itself. So while our country is catching up on industrial electronics design capabilities, I feel we have a lot of potential to exploit our industrial design capabilities. And automotive sector would be a great example of how we have matched top standards of productivity with not only product-centric design considerations, but process or production-friendly design considerations also. And this is true for various other applications. And now we are gearing up to build capabilities into PCB design and many other products which go into assembly line operations. So we need to really take those considerations in mind when the design considerations are taken for a product which goes into assembly line operations. Second, I believe, is the processes at the production line. These need continuous innovation. I think responsibility of multinational companies, especially I coming from a background of working for a Japanese company with Japanese philosophies like 5S, Kaizen, Itakona, those are really great practices to adopt. So continuous identification of bottlenecks needs to be the integral part of our organization's culture. Third, which is most important, is elimination of hidden losses. I think this is really important and can make biggest of difference. One of the examples can be forecasting accuracies or simply saying supply chain efficiencies. These essentially result into daily or monthly utilization of efficiency of fixed assets. In my own experience, I have seen situations where non-availability of one item in the bill of material can cause line stops, resulting into losses of time, effort, and money. And industry really needs to set high standards for capacity utilization, which can only happen with timely adoption of IT-based systems, ERPs, which can support data-driven decision-making and planning, and highly specialized skill set of people to manage this very, very important aspect. Lastly, I feel we need to take full advantage of something which is kind of level playing today. And manufacturing is becoming smarter, and connected devices are really helping bridge this entire ecosystem from design to after sales. We need rapid proactive adoption of such technologies and platforms. We at Panasonic here are utilizing our accumulated experience. We are almost a 100-year company into manufacturing, and we are not only providing some solutions into electronics manufacturing like SMT machines or welding robots for automotive industry, but now we are also making efforts to bring smart factory solutions to enable a stronger base of small and medium enterprises in the country. And we are extremely committed to make this happen in the time to come. So that is all from my side to reflect upon my thoughts. I'll be open for questions in the subsequent time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Manish Sharma. That was a beautiful overview. Really assembler's point of view, where the responsibility of the supply chain begins at a assembler level and goes right down to component level. I accept that productivity is an issue, and still a lot of CPJs are happening here, there. And our concern about finding a good measure of productivity still eludes us. And we are more concerned about efficiency. Thank you so much, sir. We'll be back with you should somebody ask you a question. Our next panelist is from Japan Productivity Center, Mr. Aoki. He's been a management consultant and his focus area has been product. Okay, I'll just leave it at product and over to you, Mr. Aoki.
Okay, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me this session. I'm a management consultant of Japan, but I was a former salesperson of electronic component in charge of India around 5 years ago. Today, I'm planning to explain my own viewpoint to ESDM for India based on my limited sales experience to Indian manufacturer. This is position in my understanding. Fundamental policy is make in India. Make India. And thirdly, these schemes for what I highlight is the electronic component. My sales experience during time from 20 manufacturer in the field of house. My also experience of sales activity to set TV production set made in China, made in India. And I saw someone compare the one of India with the one of comparison between Indian local one and these two images cross regarding Indian local one of left hand side. It was regarding Korean one was right hand side and thinner. Indian local one was a complete PCB board and lots of wiring and electronic components. Korean one was composed of two PCB board and electronic components than Indian one. This is also my experience of sales activity in India. The BOM list and price list foreign country maybe estimation, and so Indian engineers BOM list and price list.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, Mr. Aoki, but your voice is breaking and
Also, the slide seems to be stuck on slide 3, and I think is
for
yes, sir.
the West worldwide.
Mr. Aoki, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it seems like your slides seem to be stuck.
These circumstances
Mr. Aoki, if your internet connection is not stable right now, if with your permission, we can move on to the next speaker.
Okay, Sirat, I think that's a good idea. Till his internet connection stabilizes, okay, we can move on to the next speaker. And the next speaker is Mr. Amrit Manwani, Chairman and Managing Director, Saharsa Electronics Private Limited. And he will be talking about product design and manufacturing. Over to you, Mr. Amrit.
Thank you, Mr. Shishir Bharadwaj. Good afternoon, everybody. Mr. Sudhir Marwa, my fellow panelists, and ladies and gentlemen. As my earlier speakers, preceding speakers talked about the ESDM sector being a very strategic, basic, and a key sector related to the security and development of the Indian economy. Mr. Marwa also talked about the growth that has taken place in the last few years in this sector, which is very encouraging. And he also talked about the EMS industry or the PCB industry having reached a volume of 85,000 crores. This is all very good news. But I think time has come that we have to, graduate towards more basic ways to look at more basic ways to grow this industry, particularly considering the fact that it is a very strategic industry for Indian economic growth. And in that sense, what I would like to say is that design-led manufacturing takes a very important position in the whole scheme of things. And when I say design-led manufacturing, let me give you an example that happened recently. When the COVID vaccine was being developed all over the world, and some of the American companies or the US companies came out with a vaccine which was very effective in their countries, but it required that the vaccine needs to be transported at minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Now that kind of ecosystem doesn't exist in our country. So we have to design for manufacturing in the country. So same thing is applicable for ESDM sector, for the electronic products. We have to design products which can be manufactured in the country, considering the ecosystem of the country. And to that extent, we have to move from an OEM kind of an environment to an ODM kind of environment. Mr. Manish Sharma also talked about the design capability that is already there, and we should focus more on design. But how do we focus more on design? We have to look at designing with India-specific requirements in mind, considering the fact that whatever ecosystem exists in India, we have to design products accordingly. And that would give us the productivity that is required, very urgently required in the Indian context. We also have to look at design for manufacturing. And here, again, I would like to give you an example. Several years ago, one of our designers in the US, he designed a PC board for us, very specified the through-hole size as something like 50 micron. We asked him, why do you need 50 microns? And he said, well, I didn't really bother about it. I just thought 50 microns is good enough, or 0.05 mm is good enough. So I designed it accordingly. Now, for to produce that kind of a board, we need to laser drill. And that does not make sense because, firstly, laser drilling is very expensive and there's not adequate capacity in the country. So we said, well, can we expand this drill size to about 0.2 mm? And he says, sure, I have no problem. I can do that. And he redesigned, keeping in mind what was available in the Indian context. So that's where I'm coming to. We have to design considering what is the manufacturing skill in the country and what are the manufacturing tools available in the country. So that is very important. And both these aspects will not only improve the productivity, but will also improve the quality. Because if let's say we were to go in for a 50 micron drilling, or let's say we were to look at a vaccine which had to be transported minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit, then both our productivity as well as our quality will suffer. So having said that, what I would like to suggest is that we should have adequate design tools, invest in design tools, and invest in R&D. And to that extent, the government of India can give more incentives in R&D. Perhaps there are some R&D incentives available, but perhaps those can be increased by way of either they give some benefits in terms of whoever does more R&D, all the R&D expenditure can be income tax free, or such measures can be taken by the government. We also have to improve the productivity and quality. We have to, in the manufacturing sector, we have to look at traceability, and we have to really look at improving our yield. I think Mr. Manish Sharma also talked about this, that unless we improve the yield and unless we improve the throughput, we are not going to be a world leader in terms of ESDM. The last point, as far as this manufacturing is concerned, I would like to say that we have to think global, and that's where the volume will come, and that's where our productivity and quality will increase. How does that take place? I would briefly, as the last point, I would like to stress on skilling. Today, some of the skilling sectors like ESSC have done a very good job of skilling people. However, they have been by and large on the service sector or on existing product sector. But we have to look at the new products where skilling needs are very different. They are more advanced. So therefore, we have to focus on skilling. Some of the new sectors that we could look at skilling are the automotive electronic sector, semiconductors, both in wafer fab as well as packaging. We have to look at data storage devices because they require very special skill sets, and that's where we have to focus. Well, with these comments, I would like to end my presentation and look forward to any questions that may come up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Amrit. Your point well taken. It is often that once we have got the manufacturing process quality in place, the next step is that we go back to improving the design for manufacturing part. Very well taken. And yes, it then later on leads to other infrastructure developments like, developing technologies for manufacturing after the design for manufacturing has been put in place. Thank you so much, sir. Very nicely, condensedly talked about the whole gamut from R&D to skilling and industry-wise. Thanks for the input. Now I invite Mr. Kamal Arora, who is chairman of ASSOCHAM's National Council of Electronics Manufacturing. He would be focusing on digitization in manufacturing process. Over to you, Mr. Kamal.
Thank you so much, Shishir. Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Mr. Marwa, for leading it from the front and enabling electronics manufacturing on the road of becoming a key sector in the country. The example of mobile given by you is surely a success story, which will leave a lot of positive impact on the other leading industries like electronics manufacturing, IT manufacturing, and so on. Thanks to Udyog Manthan for having me on the elite panel of distinguished speakers. To me, digitization is a journey which has to be taken. If we look at it, comparing with let's say Industry 3.0. Industry 3.0 was very focused on digital revolution. mostly talking about robotics, automation, and doing things through robots, tightening the screws, lifting the material, and so on and so forth. Industry 4.0 is further focusing on cyber physical systems, embedded computing, IoT in the manufacturing, which is going to help manufacturing processes in the real time, which is going to definitely give a lot of positive direction to the productivity and the quality in the manufacturing. This helps reimagining the traditional manufacturing setup into a smart environment, which I think Manish was alluding to from Panasonic. This will definitely help various elements and stages of manufacturing which can interact with each other in the real time using sensors, networks, so on and so forth. The end goal definitely is going to be higher productivity, efficiency, self-managing production processes where people, machines, equipment, logistics systems, everything is communicating with each other, cooperating with each other to give quality outcomes. In traditional methods, production steps are centrally communicated to each manufacturing station, synchronized with the assembly line. In contrast, Industry 4.0 is based on asynchronous manufacturing, with component in the production flow using auto-identification technology to inform each machine and operator what needs to be done, produce, to customize the end product at each step of the production process. Now, what does it mean for electronics manufacturing? It brings in very, very agile, flexible, lean production process, enabling a variety of different products that can be manufactured.
आप जिस व्यक्ति से बात कर रहे हैं, उसने आपकी कॉल को होल्ड पर रखा है. कृपया लाइन पर बने.
Looks like somebody. Yeah. So I was talking about this brings highly flexible, lean, agile production process, which will definitely help the production facility to produce many products at the same time in the same facility. Also will mean profitable mass customization, which can help produce small lots, customized lots for the customer. This improves a lot of asset utilization, energy efficiency, so on and so forth. As I said, digitization is a journey, and when the automation was done, automation was very capex driven. You need to invest upfront and bring about those changes in the manufacturing plants. While at the digitization side of it, it's not very capex driven. It is basically providing the information to the assembly line real time, which can help you get the better finished products, understand the operator can understand the failure rate, the customization, so on and so forth. For example, apps. Developing an apps which can help bring up the business is part of digitization. You can think of cloud as another example, which can provide enablement as a service, getting training, the skilling which we heard from the previous speaker drives the skilling, so on and so forth. This brings about the change as a smart manufacturing overall, which is very much an initiative which is promoted by many industry associations, including SHM, for creating more awareness. MSMEs are going to leverage this, and this is going to give very, very different edge for them to build up the business for them. In terms of recommendation, I think India is really doing a great effort in putting this together, which is going to drive Make in India. However, there are certain things which I would like to put forward as recommendations from industry. For example, the first one would be like standard development. Now, the smart manufacturing processes requires open software, communication standards, and allow sensors, controller, people, machines, equipment, etc. to talk to each other, cooperate with each other directly. Now, there are different countries adopting different standards, but they need to collaborate to bring a more effective system. Now, the key there is that how can we get the harmonized standards which can really work, for such kind of automation. The second would be capacity building. One of the biggest manufacturing digitization challenge is the lack of relevant knowledge to implement advanced manufacturing technologies in a safe and secure manner. Now, to overcome this limitation, government, academicians, industry will have to work together to not only create a pool of industry-ready workforce, but also to upskill existing workforce in key emerging topics. For example, artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud, data analytics, IoT, zero trust model. All these are very, very important, aspect in electronics and IT and development out there. Third one would be cybersecurity. With the current situations around, a sound cybersecurity plan not only helps manufacturers identify and improve current security protocols, it also positions them to manage future risk. Now, key stakeholders should identify the most critical information assets to protect, map how that information flow through the organizations. Currently, and with any proposed technology or process change or whatever changes one want to bring in from their business importance perspective, but what exactly is going to be, and determine the level of risk, and if that information was lost or compromised. This is the most critical thing to bring back the business on up and running in case of any cyber threats. And that's what the word has seen. Many organizations, critical establishments have seen these risks. And finally, making the capital and the credit available for upgrading the businesses for manufacturing and digitization. I think the key overall would be that while we do this, the regulatory regime should be conducive to do the ease of doing of business, and delays in certificate or any OPEX in formulation of policy, etc., can lead to some uncertainty in the business. As we were hearing Manish talking about. So that is very, very helpful. We heard Mr. Marwa talking about it. We are doing better day by day on EODB, and look forward to many more conducive efforts by the government to increase it better. So thank you very much, and back to you, Shishir. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Kamal. I have one direct question to you before anybody else can ask. What do you think is going to be the biggest impediment to MSMEs going in for Industry 4.0? Just one biggest. Your mic, sir.
Yeah, sorry, I muted immediately. Yes, so the biggest would be that how quickly they adopt digitization, and they think this as most enablement rather than looking at it as an investment for their organization. So that understanding the moment they have got it would be the game changer. For us, it is important as an industry, as a government, to come together to do that enablement for the MSME along with the line ministry.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Point taken, and I could capture one very important part where we have constantly struggled, and yes, many of our manufacturing lines are only complete when we have a machine from Germany doing the inspection, one from Japan manufacturing, and then finally inspection done by an Indian guy, and all of us speak different languages. So I do agree that some sort of a standardization or an interpreter needs to be put into place so that all of us can talk to each other. Thank you. That's the machines talking to each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Before I go to the next person, can I check with Mr. Aoki? Mr. Aoki, is your internet stable now?
Yes, should be okay.
Yes, sir. Please put on your video and let's have a presentation from you before I call on Mr. Sanjay.
Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, I can.
Okay. May I continue?
Please do, sir.
Okay. Sorry. Based on my sales experience, let me think about how to strengthen the ESDM. I thought India should focus on this invisible and conscious layer like this. So especially I felt it was better to change the thinking way and concept of an Indian engineer and purchaser. Through my limited sales experience, I have 3 suggestions to Indian local engineers and purchasers. Firstly, to investigate production set of excellent competitor. This leads to the result, Indian local manufacturer increases productivity. And secondly, to investigate a value for customer. To lead to the result, Indian local manufacturer increases productivity. And thirdly, to investigate excellent component. This leads to result, Indian local manufacturer increases quality. Firstly, it is investigate the production set of excellent competitor. I think benchmark is important by taking the production set of competitor apart. For example, in this design change from original one to new one, Indian manufacturer can reduce one PCB board and some more components and wirings. This leads to the result of increased productivity. I think the productivity is based on this basic formula, output divided equal productivity. In this case, Indian manufacturer increases productivity by reducing input, such as PCB board, component, and wiring. And secondly, it is to investigate a value for customer. This is basic but most important. If think like this, is value for customer, Indian manufacturer should realize this value. This leads to the increase for productivity. In this case, Indian manufacturer increases productivity by increasing output, such as value for customer. This is a reference about how to realize a value for customer. I think concurrent engineering is so useful to realize a value for customer and shorten lead time of design and manufacturing. In my experience, salesperson who grasps the value for customer should take an initiative from the first stage. Otherwise, the concept of value for customer becomes faint step by step. And thirdly, it is to investigate an excellent component. It is better to adopt an excellent component to realize a quality for customer. This is a comparison between before and towards the future. As I mentioned, at that time before, it was enough to follow BOM list and price list. However, Indian local engineer and purchaser are better to investigate excellent component and realize a quality for customer toward the future. In this example, CPU is so hot that I think it's okay to adopt component for automotive grade to solve the heat issue for safety. This is quality for customer. This is also the reference. Let me refer to making an excellent component. As I mentioned, to make a quality for customer clear is by taking an excellent production set of competitor apart and by grasping the value for customer. Then salesperson, engineer, QC person, purchaser, manufacturer must discuss how to realize the quality and how to solve the issue concurrently. Through the discussion, specification of components is specified to realize the quality for customer. This is also reference. Let me refer to making excellent component for Make in India. Development roadmap is important in both production set of foreign customer side and component of Indian side. In most cases, customer's roadmap is ahead of the one of components. If the local manufacturer of India tries to make an excellent component, the Indian company have to get the information, customer's roadmap, through salesperson. And roadmap of Indian local manufacturer have to catch up the customer's one by using concurrent engineering method. Finally, I touch on the relation between value, quality, and productivity. This is my own formula, namely value for customer times quality for customer equal productivity. Output divided input. Output means software such as value for customer and quality for customer. Input means hardware, PCB board, wire, component. That is all from my side.
Thank you, Mr. Aoki. And I would just say that hope your internet had not destabilized in your first presentation. And personally, I am so pleased to see such a crisp and a concise presentation of a subject which has got very huge depth, concurrent engineering and understanding what productivity actually means and what quality actually means. Because there are many panelists here who would know that. Is somebody's mic on? Many panelists who would know that many times the bill of material approach to selling is usually one way, and it's always to the buyer side who constantly beats down the price. And that is really making our component people even suffer, or rather they don't even get a look into what the product is going to be doing. So thanks a lot for bringing that formula out, and very nice to hear that it's your own. I hope some more people will raise questions on this, and we'll come back to you. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Our next speaker is Sanjay Huprikar, who is President IPC Europe and South Asia. It is an association connecting electronic industries, and he will talk about education and standards for electronic industry. Over to you, Sanjay. Please, Sanjay, you need to start again after unmuting yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Bharadwaj, for the warm welcome. And I want to thank the government of India, the various ministries and the agencies for inviting us. We're very honored to be on this panel. The story I'm going to share with you is kind of just building upon the nice foundation that the previous four speakers have set for all of us today. Mr. Marwa began obviously giving us a beautiful overview of the incredible growth that India has already experienced. And I think one of the key things that Mr. Marwa said was, manufacturing excellence is the key to promoting domestic production. So I want everybody to keep that theme in mind. Mr. Sharma from Panasonic spoke about numerous great things, but the key thing that he spoke about was performance being a differentiator. Mr. Arora talked about standards and the importance of standards. And then Mr. Manwani spoke about skilling being a key feature. And finally, Mr. Aoki spoke about the value chain and value. So I'm going to build upon all of those wonderful foundations that were set by the previous speakers. So let me tell you a little bit first about IPC. Our tagline is that we're helping the industry build electronics better. We're a global nonprofit association. We began in 1957. Representing all facets of the electronics manufacturing industry. If you look at the chart on the right, you'll see our membership is made up of OEMs, EMS companies, suppliers, circuit board, and we have a fairly healthy wire harness membership as well. These are all important factors as we develop the agenda for the Indian growth of manufacturing. So first, I want to compliment the government. I think the government in India has just done a magnificent job of promoting the policies, the schemes that have been set up, some of the incentives that have been put together. I think it's just a great way to explain the wonderful growth that India has seen. Having said that, there are still things that I think we all can do as an industry to continue this incredible trend. The two areas that I would like to focus on are skilling and skill development is one, and then the adoption of industry-wide standards, specifically for PCBA, PCB, and wire harness. Mr. Arora spoke about, spoke about the value of standards earlier, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through these bullet points. I think everybody knows. I think the one of the very interesting thing about standards, everyone kind of focuses in on, the cost implications, the productivity implications, the quality implications of standards, which is very important. I think one of the other things that standards really does for all of us in the industry is gives us a common framework, a common set of definitions. And I think that's really important from a communication standpoint. As OEMs are talking to their vendors or vendors are talking to their suppliers, having a common language and a common communication, standards is a big key for that. So I think that's an area for standards that's very important. As an association, a nonprofit, we do a lot of surveys. And so this is just one particular interesting survey that I just wanted to give as a data point for everybody. People were asked the question, what are the operational benefits for standards? And I think this is a very telling chart. Everyone basically said they recognize standards as helping improve quality of electronic assemblies, reliability, and also the business's ability to stay competitive was a very interesting feature for this. So again, just standards are really important, and I think the industry recognizes that. So we, I think, have to work together as private-public partnership to continue to improve those standards going forward. Let's talk about skilling. That was a very important subject that Mr. Manwani raised in his introduction. We approach skilling, and I think the industry should approach skilling in a different manner. I think everyone tends to focus on foundation, students, newcomers, new operators. It's very important, and I think we have to recognize the importance. But we should not lose sight of the fact that even people who are already in industry, who have experience, they also require skilling. As the gentleman spoke earlier, Industry 4.0, the world is changing. We need different tools. How do we establish the new technologies? So even established technicians, established engineers need training. So we see this as a continuum of learning. Foundation courses for new people, certification programs for experienced people, and then even maybe a pillar where we can talk about standards experts. So I think there's a lot of great opportunities that we all have in front of us to work together to really create the right educational platform. I think Mr. Manwani said it best. You really have to design with your ecosystem in mind. We all need to understand what the Indian ecosystem is, and we need to make sure that we put together the skilling programs that really match and leverage those great opportunities in India. When asked about having certified and trained employees, what were the positive benefits? Overwhelmingly, people saw an improvement in their workforce expertise, and they saw much better production efficiency. So I think both the combination of standards and training allow us to really start down that path of manufacturing excellence that we spoke about earlier. I'd like to tell you, just take 30 seconds and tell you a story. Based from an IPC member in California. They're in the aerospace high-density circuit board business. Despite using all of the great technologies and state-of-the-art equipment, when they were doing their board production, their yield was still only 74%. That means they were throwing away 26% of their boards. Mr. Sharma talked about waste earlier. There's a great example of throwing away 26% of your board. So think about this board. This board was for a high-end avionics aerospace control system. The board itself cost $5,000. They were building only 600 units a year. But if you're throwing away 26%, that's a loss of $800,000. They finally threw their hands up in the air. They said, we can't continue to operate this way. This high loss, this scrap, we can't do it. So what can we do? So they looked into the methodology of standards and training for their organization. They went through an entire year, this organization, of adopting circuit board assembly, circuit board acceptability, assembly requirements. They had a course in rework. They went through this entire list. 75 employees were trained. And within a year of training those employees, they were able to achieve 100% yield. So not every example is going to be this glowing. I understand that. But I think it's very, very, it's a great story. It highlights the importance when an organization finally realizes that they need to improve in the area of upskilling and standards, that great things can happen on a production line. So just a wonderful story about the value of standards and skilling in terms of really being competitive, really reducing your waste, and really showing productivity. As far as certification goes in the world, as far as IPC certification, we certify on circuit board assembly, wire harness. These are the key building blocks for electronics all over the world, certainly in India. Here are the countries so far that have certified. And India is coming up. I'll show you a chart in a second that shows the great growth in India in certification. Why is all this important? Well, as you have talked about the need for making for India, you want to export. A lot of companies are paying attention to India. If we look at just 4 key verticals, communications, automotive, aerospace, energy, and power, you recognize all of these companies. IBM and Cisco, Bosch and Continental, Thales and Boeing, Siemens and GE. Prominent companies who are looking to countries like India to build their products. So they're looking at their value chain, and they're looking at their vendor list, and they're looking at the areas they want to build, and they want to expand here. So I think India has, as they've shown already, not only are you building your own products for your own people, you have your own companies doing it, but important multinationals are looking at India as a great opportunity to continue to build for industry. So I think that's very exciting as we continue the growth. I spoke about this earlier. If you look at the chart on the left, let's not count the pandemic year of 2020. It was a very strange year for everybody. But between 2017 and 2019, certifications, IPC certifications worldwide grew 13%. But if you look at the chart on the right, India's certifications in that same time period grew 52%. Just amazing growth in India. We should all be proud of the growth there, and we should all be excited about the future growth. Our message to you from IPC is you're doing great. What we can continue to add there is let's work together to find areas for new standards that can help the industry. And let's continue to focus on skilling, not just at the foundation level, which is important, but let's look at a continuum of skilling across all of the different facets, all of the different working groups. Why this is important for India, Mr. Marwa spoke about it in his introduction. If India is building a lot of class 2 products, I think Mr. Marwa said that India now is the second largest handset maker in the world. That is an amazing statistic considering where we were 10 years ago. It's very important that even in the class 2 level, that people recognize the value of standards and education. They certainly do at class 3. Automotive, defense, telecom infrastructure, medical devices, all recognize the value of standards and training. But I think it's important for us as an industry and us as a panel and us as a group to recognize and highlight that these standards and trainings are also important in the production of high volume laptops, consumer electronics, televisions, appliances, handsets, so on and so forth. I think my time is up. India is manufacturing quality products for the world. Great steps are being taken. We want to be part to help the industry continue to move forward. Mr. Bharadwaj, I pass it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. That was really nice and a good perspective to saying that we could improve communication within supply chain, and also a revelation that's IPC's class 3 for highly fail-proof electronic devices, which is where most of the consumers want their product to be performing at. Thank you so much, Sanjay. We'll come back to you with some more questions later on. And now I pass the mic on to Mr. George Paul, CEO Mate, and he would address, or he would talk about leading by standards. Over to you, Mr. George.
Thank you, Mr. Bharadwaj. Good evening to officers of Udyog Manthan. Good evening to Mr. Marwa, Joint Secretary Meiti, a longtime friend of the industry, and my fellow panelists. I thank Udyog Manthan for having me on this platform. If I may refer to the mission of Quality Control Council of India, it is to lead a nationwide quality movement. And in the words of the late President APJ Abdul Kalam, QCI must become an organization serving the people of the country, promoting prosperity through quality. Those were his words and his direction that he set for QCI. And in this context, yes, as learned speakers have spoken earlier, we achieved prosperity through quality, resulting in productivity increase, our products being more competitive, resulting in increased demand from manufacturing from the country. Now, I wish to share another paradigm to QCI to look into, and I call it as prosperity through leading with standards. And this I set in the context of electronics, and electronics has certain unique nature to it, which is different from the other sectors of the industry. Electronics today is a horizontal that cuts across all products and service domains that we use in society today. So it's part of every product or every service that we use. Second is electronics, unlike most other industry domains, is evolving at a very fast pace, both in terms of the technology and the products that come out of it. And what this means is that the electronics as a domain and ESDM as an industry is literally reinventing itself every 3 years. That's the pace at which it is evolving. Now, this is a challenge. As some of the earlier speakers said, we need to reskill for tomorrow. We have new tolerances that need to be met, right? So it is a challenge, no doubt, but it is also an opportunity. And this is an opportunity that India can aspire and work towards, and that is take a leadership position in the next cycle of the technology and products that come. And in this, if we work on a strategy based on this, then India can lead in design-led manufacturing. And in this program, a very critical enabler is standards. Now, India has two options. One is we can be a follower on standards, or second is we could lead with standards. And let me sort of throw some light on this. When in electronics, where there is such a rapid evolution, when we say that we are a follower of standards, what it means is that by the time we step in, other nations have already built products and taken a lead. And once again, we are a follower. I mean, we have missed out the initial phase of the product, the opportunity to build IP, the opportunity to skim the market, all of that is lost. And then we do it at the later stage of the product cycle. Now, when we say lead with standards, what are we saying? We are saying that the Indian industry, the Indian academia, or the Center of Excellences, they lead in setting these global standards. We participate in these global bodies because today we are one global economy. Electronics is so very interlinked that you cannot make a standard that is unique to a country. But we leverage our advantage that we have of a huge market and lead with standards, which means that Indian industry then design products and manufacture products which are leaders in their own space. So this should be a part of an integrated strategy that we draw for ourselves, and we can leverage the manufacturing that currently India is drawing into the country. So with manufacturing, that is that single point where you have all the design knowledge, all the technology, all the products, all collapsing in and finally getting into manufacturing. You can see the whole crucible over there. So India should identify maybe 10 or 20 electronic products or electronic related products and say that in these products, we will lead with standards so that the Indian ESDM community comes out with products that are global leaders. one of the steps, so one is we identify these products. I mean, these could be, products like we said, set-top boxes, tablets. It could even be air conditioners and TVs. With the large 15 million televisions getting produced in India, or with the huge numbers being manufactured in India, we can aspire to get involved in the design cycle so that the next generation of these can be designed out of the country. So manufacturing industries could expand. I mean, all of us in manufacturing have got our product engineering teams that work with the R&D and the supplier base and eventually the production lines to get that product in. These product engineering department can be expanded to become R&Ds in their own way, in terms of applied R&D that can be done, which actually gives you an understanding and also sets direction. These are the folks who can participate in the standard setting, saying that this is a standard that we can take up. This is a technology that we can look up, we can adopt for integrating into the product that we are going to design and bring out. So I just wish to place this perspective before the Quality Council of India that in addition to creating awareness of standards within the Indian community, the manufacturing community, we have an opportunity for QCI to bring in this aspect of leading with standards, which is there, this capability and capacity exists with the manufacturing, and they should look at adopting and making a difference. Thank you, and back to you, Mr. Bhardwaj.
Thank you so much, Mr. Paul. And yes, definitely an area where if we set standards, naturally we are the ones leading. And as you rightly said, that by the time we start using standards, somebody has practiced it, standardized it, and then set a standard. Definitely we should be coming out with some standards. Probably they'll come out when we are more customer facing. Start from there and work backwards. Thank you so much, sir. And now I will ask Mr. K. Anandan, who is head of Electrical Electronics TUV SUD South Asia, who will talk about certifications, primarily for consumer use. For consumer use. Over to you, Mr. Anandan.
Thank you, Mr. Shishir. Thanks for the opportunity. Good evening to all. So I am going to more talk about on the regulatory requirements for India when it's come out from the manufacturing, what product needs. So it's good that we have started with the ISA mark initially. So then we started with WPC, this Wireless Planning Commission, as well as from Telecom Products, this Telecommunication Engineering Center, back to standards and labeling. So this is our country requirements for all the products has to fulfill for the country rating. Still for last couple of years we have made there, we have not changed the voltages. So, and this is for the low voltage directive where we are offering the ISA marks for the products when it come out from the market. We started with ISA mark, and later government introduced in 2012, it was a very good scheme, that's compulsory registration scheme. So in that, in 2012, they first listed with the 15 products category, followed by in 2013, another 15 category, again in 2017, 13 categories. So up to till date, totally 65 products, they made it mandatory for the compulsory registration scheme, which gives a strong stop to the countries like China and Taiwan when they want to export to India. Without having this BIS mark, they cannot enter. So this was a very good development from the government aspects. And when it comes to the regulated products on the ISA mark, it started with this almost 16 standards they listed when they started. And this is the process, and this effective from the compulsory registration scheme, so that it started mainly for the information technology products as well as the audio video requirements. So these are the products listed from the government, including the plasma TVs, LED TVs, and then point of sales, copying machines, readers, and then power banks, mobile phones, adapters, chargers. So this makes, if you most of the gadgets now what we are using, it's certified under BIS. This is the good regulatory driven from the government of India. So these are the regulated products, including now they started with the appliances, including the speakers, Bluetooth, digital cameras. Okay, and this is the marking where the government has introduced from the certification perspective compared to US and Europe. Their markings are different. For India, this is the mark. This R mark is a BAS mark. This for with the registration number. Normally, we used to follow for all the products. And come back to the wireless. There is a challenging technologies now. When started with 2G, now it's 3G, 4G, up to 5G is developing. And also the government has also strictly followed the WPC Wireless Planning Commission requirements from the equipment type approval. All the wireless products has to undergo this WPC approval. So they has to register in the spectrum, and then they has to get the type approval certification from this IR standards as well as from the GR standard. This is also the good initiative by the government for the wireless requirements. And the most important regulatory recently they started is for the telecom products. As per TEC under MTCTE requirements, they made mandatory for all the telecom products as to undergo the TEC testing, and also they affix a TEC mark in the product. When they started with ISMR, now they also concentrated on the normal consumer goods on this one BAS mark, and again this is a TEC for all the telecom products, which has gives for all for the big companies like Nokia, Motorola. So they has to undergo the telecom networking systems, has to undergo the TEC certifications. And this is a list of products, again the regulated products in India so far from for audio video category, in Wi-Fi. And this is the regulated products for the telecom and WPC. I just run folio and I just come to that important point. So yes, so what we really need is for challenges, opportunities. I could see this now. So far, the battery requirements, the battery standards are still required lot of infrastructure and lot of test facility to fulfill the requirements. These are the worldwide battery standards as per IEC, VD, UL, JS, European standard. But in India, comparing to this energy storage systems, we have to still really develop more kind of standards in these requirements. Also, apart from this industrial ESA solution, also we need, there is a challenges and opportunities in this area also. There we need a more lab to do on the verification testing of the voltage loads, and then earthing testing and verification of the conditions of the production. So still there is some gaps in fulfilling this kind of requirements from the government, especially on the energy storage systems. And also, I just want to talk about more on this residential EAS. Also, it's quite challenging. Now, most of the residentials adopting under this storage systems, but still we could not see any kind of proper standards to adopt compared to the other countries. So this is also the challenges and opportunities for us to develop more on this battery as well as on this PCS as well as on the grid code requirements. Because Europe and US they strictly follow this kind of regulations. As of India, still it's still lagging, but we are, I think, expecting this opportunity and challenges to make it. And most important is that this EV charging testing system. So there is a good demand now from the Indian government, but unfortunately we have a lack of testing facilities in India. Of course, we have quite EMAMC testing, safety testings, but compared to the functional safety and validation testings and for the charging cables, grid requirements, still we need to develop. There are a lot of opportunities in this area on this EV charging requirements. And this is one of the main area the government to focus on. And there are some confirmation testing from CHAdeMO, CHARIN, CCS, and ISO 15118 and DIN GB requirements are still in the pipeline. But this has to focus more because in 2025 there will be a drastic change on this electric vehicles in India. For that, we should have a proper test facilities to fulfill those requirements. And this especially on the EV charging cables as per IEC 62893 as well as 62752 standards. These are most critical standards throughout the world. And US and Europe has already adopted this actually. But still in India, yes, there are some companies started on this own facility. But as of now, from this government side, this is very much challenging requirements and this is a good opportunity in the coming years. And the next important thing is this, the battery management system, especially on the functional safety. It's still we need as quite challenging in India, because overall safety relating of this equipment under controls depends on the functioning of this electrical and programmable components, and there is other risk reduction measure. So there is an assessment procedure to follow for this analysis on the hazard, risk and minimization of the safety integrity levels. And so that is still the battery management is quite challenging. And so this really needs to have a more focus on this BMS, especially on the functional safety. And the risk for minimization standards already they listed from IEC is already 60730-1, and this functional safety standards still for automotive and other companies has followed this strictly, but especially for the battery management system, it still required more functional on this one, especially 61508. And 62061 is the main standard for the risk minimization requirements for the system, and ISO 26262 especially for the automotive standards. So these are the main standards as globally adopted, but in India still there is challenging to ensure. I think in future definitely we are expecting to this to become one of the regulatory driven mandatory for India. Okay, and thank you. And especially I just want to talk about on this 5G technology, because there is a drastic improvement from this 2G, 3G, 4G, and there is a very good demand for this wireless product. When it comes to any manufacturing products, now wireless is part of the integrated one. So government has some limited labs in India, especially up to Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and there are some requirements for some frequencies up to 2.4 gigahertz they can able to support, especially for the 5G technologies from the European perspective standards and the US perspective standards. Still we have a lack of labs in India, and this is very much challenging for us to develop those labs in India, but hope in future definitely government will ensure that there is a very good infrastructure for testing those kind of huge 5G requirements. Okay, that's all I want to connect, so that if you have any questions, so I just quickly run through all the standards and regulations in India. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ananda. That was very comprehensive and I would say very compact, run through of so many standards. I have just one takeaway, which probably I can pose to you straight away, is it that somewhere we should find out how these standards are going to impact our component manufacturers also, or MSME, people are going to be just involved, going to be a part of it, not the final users or the final sellers of those, let's say battery, okay, and other things. So is it that you're suggesting that we should have, certain knowledge base or awareness program where we let the component manufacturers in the whole battery manufacturing supply chain know what their responsibilities are? Or is it something different?
Yes, actually, that's what government started pulling this manufacturer also to be a part of the standard association in India. When we develop the standards, they also call for the manufacturers and component manufacturers to help us on finalizing the standard requirements. In that case, this will help to easily to overcome those issues.
Okay.
For example, for wireless products, all the manufacturers already as a part of TEC. So while developing the standards along with the manufacturing with the government of India and certification bodies like us, it's a team, so that we will generate one standard before it coming to the regulation. So it only happen driven only by the manufacturer along with the government. Of India.
Yes. Now I have one more question, which is regard to the functional testing, which you mentioned, that the functional testing is still in the hands of the, let's say the assembler or the buyer. Yes. Okay, so what do you suggest here? How can we, naturally, if there's, let us say, an electric car being manufactured by Hyundai and electric car being manufactured by Tata, okay, they are going to test the functionality of their, let us say, battery or electrical system. Yes. What do you think is the scope for a standard for this?
Yes, with respect to functional safety, there are depends on the product, standards are already defined. It is already available in the European and the US requirements. Okay. But as of now, for Asia or India, we do not have any separate standard on the functional safety. We need to follow only IEC as well as the EN standards. So for automotive, it is also referred in ISO 26262. So it depends on the product category, the functional safety standards are defined. So maybe I can share into the separate email about the list of standards on the functional safety with respect to the product category. This will help to identify the needs.
That will be good. Thank you so much. Okay. Now with that, I come to my showstopper, as they call in fashion shows. Okay. I call upon Mr. Vinod Sharma, who is MD, Deki Electronics, and Chairman at CII National ICTE Committee. He is himself a component manufacturer and has been a driver in many initiatives for easing production in electronic production in India, right from the days when the electronic industry was faced with zero import duty for components to resurging from that hard a fight as one of the world's leading manufacturers of capacitors. So over to you, Vinod.
Thank you very much, Shishir. And as expected, you put me on the spot and raised expectations. So let me see what I can do with that. But before I get on to my comments, I'd like to begin first by congratulating QCI, the entire team of Udyog Manthan, which has put together, I think, a fantastic panel today, and also the whole thought behind what we are trying to do here during this entire Manthan period. I want to thank Mr. Marwa, not only for speaking today, but for actually the reason that we have ESDM being discussed today is because of people like him. Several years ago, we kind of written off this industry and said, this is a bus we missed. Software is what we are good at, so let's focus on that, and hardware we can continue to import. From that sort of thinking, to be able to come to a center space today where I don't think anybody on this call has any doubt that we are the next manufacturing and export hub for electronics. That's been a long journey. A lot of people on this call can be thanked for it, but primarily I would say someone like Mr. Marwa, who's been a rock solid pillar at MATI, an enabler, somebody who lends us a great ear all the time, and then helps us formulate these policies, along with fantastic joint secretary and secretary that we have at the moment, and of course the Honorable Minister. So we are quite lucky to have come so far, and I think our journey has only begun. The last word before I get on to my comments is for my panelists. I think we've truly put together, fellow panelists who've truly put together a Manthan. They've approached this whole topic of productivity and quality improvement in a sustainable way for electronics in India from several different angles, from skills, education, standards, policies, design, etc. So let me sort of, because time is short, I will restrict my comments to one area of electronics, which is components. Thanks to all the efforts so far, I think we have already established, at least in some areas more than others, mobile phones as an example, that we are truly an assembly hub now. And a lot of the assembly is happening within the country on many products, but including mobiles. If you want to truly get the value, sustainable manufacturing is the key. And in my opinion, the difference between assembly and manufacturing is what is fulfilled by components. So any country that makes a reasonable number of components, nobody can make 100% of all components. This is a global supply chain driven business. So raw material or components and piece parts can flow from anywhere in the world. But unless we begin to make a substantial amount of components that we require for India, for our production in India and for exports abroad, we cannot really claim this title of being a global manufacturer. We have got to assembly, we need to now get to the next step of manufacturing. So what is so hard about manufacturing of components? We know that this is a very capital intensive area. Unlike assembly, where you can get a turnover investment to turnover ratios of 1:4, 1:6 are possible. In components, we are typically looking at 1:1, if you get lucky, 1:2, which means you put in a lot more money in order to start a business in components, machinery, utilities, all sorts of capital goods that are required there. It's typically more technology intensive than, let's say, an assembly operation, with due respect to my friends in the assembly business. What this means is that obviously the kind of skills that are required and also the kind of engagement that you have with your employees has to be a long-term employment, because long-term skill employment. Casual workers, contract workers cannot really give us high-quality components over a sustainable period of time. So the engagement that we have with these people is different. So employing people at minimum wages is not going to work as far as components are concerned. You need to engage with them, train them, skill them, and treat them as part of a team that goes together, not just for years, but sometimes for decades, as has happened in our company. It is also a labor-intensive business. So compared to finished goods where you might get one employee getting you about close to 5 million, 10 million rupees worth of production. In the case of components, that's going to be much lower. Obviously, that case is been better. Now, given this, the last bit I want to say about components is that because thanks to ITA 1 and WTO agreements that we've signed, most components are at zero duty, which means that either you are globally competitive or you're not. You won't exist. So every capacitor we make, I always, in a lighthearted way, like to claim, and I'm serious when I say that we compete with Japan on quality, we compete with Germany on reliability, but we compete with China on price for the same very component, and sometimes with India on payment terms. So that's the kind of tough life that you've got to get used to if you're going to be a component manufacturer in India who's trying to do something which has a global impact. What does this mean? It means two things. You need to ensure competitiveness outside your factory gates, and you need to ensure competitiveness inside your factory gates. And these are two separate subjects altogether. Fortunately, in the former, the competitiveness outside the factory gates, which is a more difficult thing to achieve, I can say that we are pleasantly surprised with the fantastic amount of work that the government of India has done in the last few years. The cost of energy has either come down, it's not really come down per unit, but the availability has increased. The number of hours we have to run our own DG sets has gone down. The reliability of power has increased, and we only hope that with the alternative energy, that the government of India is embarking upon, that power cuts will be a story of the past. Similarly, if you look at logistics, which is another very large cost, especially for assembly, even more than components, again, there has been a lot of improvement, and we think that in the next 3-4 years, because of the huge infrastructure spread that Indian government has taken, is undertaking at the moment, logistics will only improve. Having said that, cost of finance, again, because this is a capital-intensive business, there have been, the money availability has gone up over the period of time. Cost has come down marginally, but obviously we are not still globally competitive. So there is work to be done, but I would say it's work in process. And as a component maker, I would say, very satisfied with the progress we've seen in the last few years. Added to that, there are still some gaps, and I'm very happy that MeitY has taken on schemes like PLI and specs to be able to bridge those gaps financially. That viability gap is being filled either by a PLI scheme, 4 to 6% of your turnover coming as a turnover grant or subsidy, and then 25% coming through specs for component making, plus states also contributing anywhere between 10 and 30%. Different states have different policies. So all this augurs very, very well for manufacturing now to come into India. I think more work needs to be done. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that all the work outside factory is being done. There is issue of standards. In my opinion, we have too few test labs. The skilling is still lacking for components. There's nobody who's doing skilling for them. Our ITA is woefully incompetent. I would say that upfront. So I cannot hire a person straight from an ITI and put him onto my line even after 1 month of training. So you have to at least give them 3 to 6 months of training even before we allow them to get onto a shop floor like ours, because the component business is a far more complicated business. Having said that, I think coming to the last bit about factory competitiveness, global competitiveness means that we are competing largely with China, Korean companies in China, Japanese companies in China, or German companies in China. The Chinese workers are used to employee hostels within their factory premises, and hence they can quite comfortably work anywhere from 11 to 12-hour shifts. Now, this is very, very important because the capital equipment for components is so expensive, you cannot afford to be running 1 shift or 2 shifts. You need to leverage that capital goods fully into 3 shifts. So 24-hour operations, and companies like ours try to run also Sundays as far as possible, 6-7 days a week, obviously using relievers in different places. Our labor laws, the fact that our labor is largely, even in industrial estates like Noida that I'm speaking from, largely the labor comes from, unfortunately, slums. So they do not have good employee hostels, and I think that is, to my mind, one of the key things that needs to be done. People should be able to work for 12 hours in a factory, get all 3 meals either in the factory or in an employee hostel, have access to no power, to continuous power when they are back home, so that they can get good 8-10 hours of sleep and rest. And that is the way, basically on the shoulders of competent, healthy, enabled workers, that we can build this whole industry. In components, we are just scratching the surface at between 10 and $15 billion today. We know that there is a paper done by the Ministry of IT in China, which is aiming at a $350 billion component industry in the next 3 years. So that's the kind of contrast. So if you want to get, this 10 billion is not going to work. We need to pick, that's what the PLI is aimed at. We need to look at least a $50 to $100 billion target within the next 3 years if you want to seriously become a manufacturer and rethink this whole model. So there are several recommendations, worker hostel being one, labor laws to enable this to happen so that 12-hour shifts are normal. People should be, of course, paid accordingly because these are skilled workers, unlike an assembly line worker. They would need that. Test labs would be another thing. A demand-based supply chain. I know, Sesha, that's one of your favorite subjects. Can you imagine today that in the last 3 months, and my colleagues will bear with me, logistics costs of most raw material or components has actually gone up, has doubled, in some cases tripled. So from 3.5% cost that we were facing, we have gone today to 7%. And my feeling is that by March, this will be about 9%. Now that's, what it means is that if I were getting my raw material locally, and similarly my customers were getting their components locally, they would be 5 to 6% more competitive just by doing this. And the impact of this is even more than the PLI impact. So we need to get our act together in terms of building a whole supply chain. And that's the only way that you can look at sustainable manufacturing. Similarly, we still think of components as only components. So the spec scheme, for example, or several PLI schemes are only looking at components. Unless the components are not served by their raw material manufacturers, their capital good manufacturers, they cannot in a standalone way. That might be the start, but eventually we'll have to look at it far more holistically. And so I think competitiveness, by the very meaning of that word and the way that China has defined it in the last 2 decades, you have no choice but to either be holistically competitive as a whole ecosystem, or there is nothing called a standalone one company enterprise competitiveness. So I hope that this Udyog Manthan will help us to put together a lot of recommendations towards creating that globally competitive ecosystem supported by electronic components. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinod, for that compact and powerful speech covering the whole gamut of things. And yes, that is the way we should look at. Huge amount of our components are still coming in. So let me just draw some points which I've sort of put together. The issue that we were trying to address were two: productivity and quality. More or less, quality is taken for granted. It means that it's a necessary condition for anybody to sell in the market. Gone are the days where probably somebody would come and improve your quality. That means your buyer will work with you to improve your quality. This happened, let's say, in 90s. So actually, quality is not a static issue. It keeps moving. We moved from quality control to quality assurance. And now we are at a stage when we need to take quality back to the design part, which was what covered by a few panelists who said, listen, we should design the quality into manufacturing. Probably one of the biggest, I can lean back on Taguchi, that is what he said. He said, after we have done quality assurance, we need to make sure the specifications we design or decide in our design stage can be manufactured by my, as well as my raw material should be able to say. Now, this is one thing where I think India is sitting on a maturity continuum of quality where this becomes the key driving factor. Where people who are able to improve the performance, and where I will draw on what Mr. Aoki said. Though he said he's a salesperson, and I was a bit surprised when he said he's a salesperson, but he put that perspective very clear. It is only after we understand what the product is going to perform and how long it is going to perform what has been asked to can be designed on the quality of the components. So we have to move away from vendors to suppliers who would then take part in understanding what the product is doing. So that sort of talks about the quality. Now, I know Mr. Manish Sharma touched upon productivity, and I would request him, or if he's still around, that what should we use as a measure of productivity of my supply chain? And in the discussion that came through, what comes out as is that productivity is anything that will take us towards the goal. Okay, and what Mr. Sharma said, that the whole ecosystem needs to be designed. If that is the goal, then anything that we are doing can only be called productivity if it takes us towards a goal. Otherwise, it will just be efficiency, which probably Mr. Sharma mentioned in his speech, that we are still very efficiency oriented rather than productivity oriented. So thank you, everybody. Is Mr. Manish Sharma still there?
Yes, I'm there, Shishir.
Yeah, yes, sir. Sir, when you started your speech, you said there should be correct performance indicators for supply chain.
Absolutely.
Sir, yes, sir. Since we have another 4-5 minutes. Yeah.
No problem. I'll reflect upon. So, couple of things actually, and hearing Vinod, I get more insights. And when you say that, how do we understand quality itself? So, I'll come to productivity in a minute. So when it comes to quality, I think the very concept which has changed over a period of time when it comes to Indian consumers, and this might be largely true for both consumer-oriented goods or sort of B2B or industrial-oriented goods. The concept has changed from cost of acquisition to be sitting on the top of criteria to cost of total ownership. Or I would say, customers are becoming more conscious of not only looking at the initial cost of purchase, but how throughout the life cycle of a particular product, the total cost is for them. So that major mindset change has happened in our country also over a period of time, and hence quality is no longer only about the performance or the initial aspects of quality, but how the product performs on durability, as you rightly mentioned, throughout the life cycle. And talking about productivity, I think again, variety of indices. I think we can go on and on. Maybe in the past, in the mid-90s when I started off my career, it used to be about takt times, that, how can we reduce the takt time of the assembly operations, or those days I used to work for CRT manufacturing, one of the most complex operations. And then subsequently it evolved and it was more about capacity utilizations. Hence, I firmly believe, in my opening remarks, I mentioned that I think one of the most important focus areas for manufacturers, apart from taking care of variety of other aspects, should be to continuously identify the hidden losses. And therefore, I always keep this on the top of our criteria, that how do we adopt continuous upgradation in technology to create data-driven decision making in our operations. And I think we are extremely lucky that this is one of the strengths, especially being a country where IT capabilities are plenty. So for us, we should be looking at a situation, and somebody touched upon this very important point. I think one of the clear differentiator for us to evolve as a global player can be that how fast small and medium enterprises adopt technology for their manufacturing operations, so-called IoTization or utilization of platforms. Somebody spoke that today devices are talking to each other. So how do we create standards and parallelly create dashboards, seamless dashboards, which can create decisions based on the data which is visible on real time. So I think those are the points which I just wanted to quickly make.
Thank you so much. Is there anybody else who would like to add something more as an afterthought, or should I take out one or two questions that have been sent to us?
If I may, I just wanted to add 2 points. This point about Industry 4.0 is extremely well made. Specifically for our ESDM industry, it's still dominated by a large number of SME players. So my recommendation to someone like QCI in the Udyog Manthan team is twofold. In the auto industry, they were able to do a program which lasted over a decade called VLFM. There were some Japanese senseis who came down to India, and they developed something called visionary leadership for manufacturing. And this was primarily done with first with auto makers, but then much more with auto component makers. I think we need to launch something like that for Indian component makers and Indian assembly EMS companies, which will ensure that within factory gates, our competitiveness goes up. It will be in space utilization, capacity utilization, energy conservation, industrialization, the industry 4.0ization, use of data, statistical process techniques, the works, Pokayokes and stuff like that. So that could be something that they could do. And the second is combine that with some help from the government to be able to introduce low-cost automations, low-cost data collection. So Industry 4.0 is a big word. It scares a lot of people. But at least some small parts of that we can begin to do. At least identification of bottleneck machines, and on those bottleneck machines, how we can increase productivity, etc., etc. So I think there is a need for hand-holding, similar to what auto components had done. And as you rightly said, today we don't have a tall leader like Maruti to handhold the entire ecosystem and bring them up. The time is gone. We have leaders like Mr. Manish Sharma himself. So they are interested. They can lead the way. But I think the government needs to put together some kind of an instrument that will help component making and EMS companies get more productive.
Mr. Arora?
Yes, please.
I would like you to add something to this discussion, and then I will come back to add from my side. On the Industry 4.0.
Yeah, I think this is a very important point which Mr. Sharma is adding, that we have the component manufacturing, enablement in the country. The whole localization effort will not be very effective, right? It will end up being assembly. We have started manufacturing way back in 2007 as Dell, and still, we have not been able to come to a significant local component or local value addition. And that's primarily because most of the component in IT are still very imported one, right? So while we heard Mr. Marwa talking about the PCB assemblies and quality induced in that, I think the mobile industry has shown a way that how quality can be induced when government supports. And of course, the recommendation of the panel actually will help create that environment in the country so that more industrial focus and assembly can local manufacturing, I would say, and add more local content. So completely agree with those recommendations and look forward to make this country as a global hub for manufacturing.
Yes, Mr.
George here, if I could make a point.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, you had asked that question in terms of what SMEs need, in this journey. Well, when you come, in this journey to Industry 4.0, one of the things is when you have to mature to Industry 4.0, there is a lot of surround readiness that need to be there. And my guess is that many of our MSMEs may not be having that surround readiness to adopt 4.0. They need to cover that ground first before they come to this level. It's like if you want to implement SAP ERP within your organization, there needs to be certain minimum readiness already there. Otherwise, you will not succeed in implementing an ERP within your organization. And as part of the program that Mr. Vinod Sharma mentioned or Manish Sharma mentioned, I think we need to integrate this, evaluate the gap, and do a hand-holding and bridging exercise.
Thank you, sir. There's a question on Industry 4.0, which I will just read out, and probably it is just sort of summarizing what we have just discussed, but I will add something to it in the end. It reads, Industry 4.0 implementation in India is by and large limited to private MNC organization. The awareness level of Industry 4.0 or smart manufacturing is still nascent in government manufacturing companies and MSMEs. Isn't there a need for the government intervention in the form of a scheme to promote Industry 4.0 in these segments? The scheme may focus on raising awareness as well as demonstration of techniques that would instill confidence in the manufacturers. Now, I think this is what we were talking about, the government trying to come in and help. Now, in my experience of going back and looking at industries adopting ERP, I think it is such a basic system, basic system, now we're talking 20 years down the line. When it started, it was a big, huge thing. But 20 years now, talking about 2020, it is such a basic system, it doesn't require much to be done. But we fumbled on it. We fumbled. And that same ERP system, suppose it costed 20 lakhs for MSME there, is now still going to cost 20 lakhs because they've added some more feature on it. So what is my point of view by telling here is that we should look at, from the government's point of view, look at making sure that the cost of ownership of such Industry 4.0 systems is minimal. Cost of ownership. Now, to use such Industry 4.0 system, we will require skilled manpower. So anyway, there is going to be some expenditure from the MSME on the skilled manpower. Because when we look at people who are scared of ERP, the cost was nearly 4% of the turnover. That is what most of the ERP vendors started off. First thing they asked the turnover and they said, this is the amount I'm going to bill you. Okay. So a fear like this is already set in. We are talking about Industry 4.0 to increase productivity. My question to anybody here is that what should we do to make sure that this fear, or what should we do to make sure there's a very strong causality, not a correlation, a causality between when we say that it is an Industry 4.0 answer to increasing productivity? Anybody? Yes.
So I think you offer a really good perspective there. I think the problem, one of the problems with Industry 4.0 is for most of the universe, it's still all about buzzwords. And no one has taken really, or very few people have taken the approach of really focusing on implementation. So I think what the government can do, so using India as an example, I think what industry and the government can do to work together is to focus on the implementation aspects of 4.0 and not get caught and lost in all of the buzz that's going on. So you mentioned in your introduction, Mr. Bharadwaj, simple concept like machine-to-machine protocol. How do machines talk to each other? That's a combination of hardware and software. India is well positioned to tackle that challenge. How do you get machines to talk to each other in a way that everyone can leverage data analytics? Because I think that's the key to the future of manufacturing. The companies that harness the data analytics are going to be the ones that go ahead. And the only way to do that is to understand how you can get the machines to talk to each other, how you can extract the data, how you can make better decisions based on the data. So if I were to vote, I would say focus on finding those best practices in current implementation and sponsor that as a way forward as opposed to getting caught up in the buzz.
Very well said, sir. I think when we start implementing, post-implementation, we can develop standards to say this is the way it should be done. But yeah, I agree with you that only when we implement will we get to see the true benefit. Anybody else to add to this?
So I think, in my view, sorry, go ahead, Ms. Amritan.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that as Shishir said, what is the MSME sector doing? Are they really ready towards Industry 4.0? I would say that the medium scale industry, the MSME sector, is taking steps toward in that direction. Most of the, at least the medium level industries are implementing ERPs. They are also looking at real time monitoring, and as some people said about machine to machine interface. All that is being done, maybe not at the speed that it would be required to become global leaders. But I think particularly in the component space, I'm sure Vinu Sharma's company has done that. Our company certainly has, done that. And I know my colleagues in the SME sector, they all are implementing all those tools which will make us, ready for Industry 4.0.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Mr. Kamal.
Shishir, what is happening is from the time you were talking about SAP implementation to now is that initial cost of acquisition of any digitization or automation was huge. Now, with the enablement of cloud, platform as service, a lot of applications available for testing and for test environment for industries. Now, MSMEs can actually test their environment and it's a litmus test. They can actually see the benefit coming out back to the business without actually going into a high capex investment. And this education, when it comes to them, that will enable them to quickly adopt this. So that enablement, industry, government, everybody need to come together to do that for MSME, I think.
Thank you so much. I think there's a very elaborate discussion on Industry 4.0. And yes, I am of the believer that the assemblers or the, assemblers or the high tier level manufacturing companies should sort of make it convenient for the MSME to adopt the systems. And that is where the true benefit is milked. Okay. And yes, we should learn from some experiences of MSMEs and create an environment that should be in the future rather than what it is right now. So when we look at Industry 4.0, we should put together all our expertise to say this is how our supply chain system should perform in the future. So I think that's a takeaway from here. And should anybody have any other question to ask each other panel, because we're just, I think, 4 minutes short of the closing time. Does anybody have any question?
Yeah, no, if I may come in, I don't have a question, but a suggestion that, somebody perhaps Sanjay mentioned that, upskilling is a very important aspect of, increasing productivity and quality. I think that needs to be, that needs proper attention, both by the industry itself, as well as the government support. Government should, encourage MSME sector particularly to keep on upskilling their manpower.
Yes. Okay. Okay, with that, I think we are just 3 minutes short of the closing time. I would really like to thank all the panelists, QCI, and the ministry who made this thing happen. And I'm pretty sure we will manage to create a nice compendium to send. And what actually is coming out is that we need to make sure more and more value addition of BOM, I'll be very specific, more and more value addition of BOM happens within the country, because we know that though manufacturing is taking place, huge amount of items are still being imported. A very simple catch is to make sure that you catch hold of the BOM part and see how much of that is being manufactured in India. And that would systematically allow our component industry to have faith that their investments can yield results, because naturally huge investments would mean long-term operation. They cannot, the margins are set by the market. Low margins would mean that the business should be long-lasting and there should be an assured business from their buyers. And that is one of the biggest concerns of component manufacturers. But overall, thank you everybody from all my heart, because we covered the perspective of knowledge, industry, product development, and productivity. With that, I would like to say thank you once again, and over to Seerath. Seerath, would you like to say something?
Thank you so much, Mr. Shishir Bharadwaj, for fantastically steering the deliberation and summarizing the discussion so articulately. I would like to extend our gratitude to Mr. S.K. Marwaha for gracing this event with their presence and setting up the context for the session. I would like to thank our illustrious panelists for deliberating on the issues of quality and productivity in this industry. I request all the experts to spare some time and provide recommendations and suggestions in the template shared with you, as this would help in creating a compendium of quality-related sectoral recommendations, which will be shared with the ministry. Furthermore, I would like to thank all the attendees for being such a fantastic audience. Here, I conclude the session. Goodbye and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you so much.